All right, and that is the cue that we are going to go ahead and get started. So, just want to say welcome to everyone. Glad you could join us, whether you're on a beach or in the barn or in the office or at home. I love to see everybody everywhere joining us here for these webinars. So really awesome that you could spend some time with us today. And for those of you that will watch this recording in the future, welcome and thank you for participating as well. So today we are going to be joined by Jennifer to discuss carbon space and opportunity for dairy to not waste. We really hope that you brought your questions, and we really encourage you that throughout the webinar that you use the chat feature to ask those questions or leave comments, and also please unmute yourself. There's going to be a lot of info today, and so Jennifer and I want to make sure that if you have a question, please in the moment unmute yourself, use the chat, and ask those questions so we can definitely have a discussion. So I also want to welcome you. If you are in a space where you can, please go ahead and turn your video on. We want to see where you are, and whether you're on the go, in the barn, on the beach, dressed up or dressed down, we definitely would love to see you today. So please, that really helps us and the speaker kind of gauge the audience. So if you can, please join us with your video. So I'm Amanda Borkowski. I'm the Dairy Girl Network staff lead for our Enhance webinars, and I have just a couple of Dairy Girl Network updates to kind of kick us off before we head into the webinar. So something kind of really exciting at Dairy Girl is we are up to almost 3,000 official members. And this is my ask to you. If you aren't a member yourself, or if you know someone that should be a member, please sign up or encourage them to sign up. Whether you work with cows, work to support people with cows, have a history in the industry, or just a passion for dairy, there's a seat for you at the Dairy Girl Network table. Our membership is fast, it's free, and it's easy to sign up, and only takes a couple of minutes on our website. When you go to dairygirlnetwork.com, there's a big join button or a join tab that you can click on. And in a little bit, I'll throw the link in the chat too, if that'll be easier. Perks of being a Dairy Girl Network official member are that you get all of our event announcements, both local and national, direct to your email inbox. I promise we do not spam you. There's special deals like a free webinar for your birthday month. And then you can also get our newsletter as well. So like I said, our membership is free. So you get to choose which programs you want to be involved with, kind of a la carte. So help us spread the word about Dairy Girl Network and our offerings, and help us get to 3,000 members. One other place to get involved with Dairy Girl Network is by joining our private Facebook group, Exchange by Dairy Girl Network. This group is vibrant, or it is a vibrant organic space to ask questions, to share wins, connect with others, and discuss anything and everything Dairy Girl. It's filled with farming questions, kid questions, recipes, job openings, so much more. If you're not already a member of this group and you want to join, just go to Facebook and in the search bar, look for Exchange by Dairy Girl Network. You'll be able to click Join Group. And when you do that, there are going to be 3 questions that pop up. It's really important that you answer those questions. It helps us make sure that we are getting real non-bots in the group and things like that. And so if there's a space that says who invited you to this group, feel free to put Amanda from Dairy Girl Network sent me, and that will help me and the other admins make sure you get in there quick. So with all of that, now I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. So Jennifer Bockhahn was raised on a small organic dairy farm in Western New York, where she worked alongside her father. After graduating college, she spent 5 years working with the Dairy Environmental Systems Group at Cornell University. In this role, she focused on public outreach, education, and applied research programs driven by farmer needs and requests. Topics of focus in this role included methane measurement, manure management, barn design, and all aspects of cow comfort. At Callebaut, Jennifer develops and implements dairy sustainability projects that reduce risk and increase financial compensation for farmers for their efforts, and is excited to share her learnings and to learn from farmers everywhere. And so remember, please have those questions ready, unmute yourself, use the chat. And Jennifer, I am going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate the introduction. So I think there's only a few of us online today, but I genuinely do want to encourage anyone to speak up. There are no dumb questions. There's no harm in, speaking out or putting in the chat. If I'm speaking about something that is not clear, or if a term needs to be defined, because there are in the, up and coming sustainability space, especially around carbon, there are a lot of terms that are new or changing meaning. So honestly, just stop me. So yeah, I'm really grateful to be invited to speak to everyone today, and think of me as a resource here. So I'm hoping to just provide you guys with the information you might need to, respond when you get approached to participate in different carbon programs on your dairy farms, or ways to think about it ahead of time for yourself. So without more time, there we go. So I think you've all read the introduction and the invite, so I'm just gonna kind of move past that. So just, today I'm gonna go through a couple different topics. Happy to jump around, happy to go off track if you guys have other topics you want covered. But I'll start with going over just some of the terms that are thrown out there to make some clarity around that. Talk about corporate sustainability, so where all these are coming from and why people are asking for, more, carbon reductions from dairy farms. As part of that, I can go into what scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions are, which might help with understanding also why corporates are coming down to talk to the dairy farms. And then I can get into carbon credits, types of carbon credits, how they're created, why farm data is needed. And then to close, we can kind of talk about what the benefits could be on farm and how you can make the most of this new, market coming forward. So to start, there's an incredible amount of terms out there. I will admit, when I started at Callebaut last year, I was thrown into a carbon credit project, which then I realized I didn't want to be a carbon credit project. I preferred it to be a carbon inset project, which then has transferred to a carbon claim project. So it changes all the time, and it's incredibly confusing, and I will state that very clearly right now. So a lot of what you'll hear about are carbon credits. Often when the word carbon credit is used, that is referring to an offset. And I have my offset slide here. So, sorry. So a carbon offset is where on farm you are creating a carbon reduction. That carbon reduction is packaged into this nice little bundle so that it is a verified reduction that has occurred. And an offset is being sold outside of the dairy industry. So the dairy farmer is giving up their right to claim that reduction in their milk product, on their farm, even to claim speaking about it. So there's not even a marketing advertisement right in there anymore. And that offset is what was commonly done with the digester programs coming out of California. Those were sold. Those offsets were then the renewable natural gas credits were sold to offset natural gas and other fossil fuels. Then we're coming around to the carbon insets. An inset stays within the value chain. So it stays with the dairy product. It goes to a CPG or a brand company like a Nestle, and is used to show a reduced emission for their product. And then we can look at even more things like what is the scope of this? What is the intensity of the product? And all of this just goes on and on. So part of my recommendation is don't worry yourself so much with the terms for now, because they're constantly changing. And so to understand why they're changing all the time is because there's a lot of global regulations for companies around carbon. So in the bottom right here, you can see SBTI, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. There's regulatory markets, international standards, and compliance markets. All of these are just ways of saying there are global pushes and regulations on companies to reduce their carbon emissions. SBTI is a voluntary program, but many brands you'll see in the grocery store are a part of this program. It is Science-Based Targets Initiative is what it stands for. It's very strict. There are lots of rules to follow. The reports companies create saying anything about the emissions they've reduced are now audited, the same way their finances are audited. So there's a lot, going into this and a lot of pressure coming down on the companies. And so when the pressure comes down, it is because of the scope of the emissions. So here I'll say that these are the different scopes. You can see the number in the bottom right of each rectangle. So the reason dairy farmers are talked to is because of the scope 3 emissions. So if we think of scope, think of it like a, we'll say chocolate factory, so the very center of that is the factory itself. It is the direct emissions from operating that factory. The scope 2 is the middle column here. That is the emissions that come from operating the factory, but off. So you're burning a fossil fuel and getting electricity delivered to the factory. You're using gas to get to the factory. Those are the scope 2 emissions. But then we get to scope 3. Scope 3 is where you get so many other things. It's any product you bring into your factory to process. So when you're in a chocolate factory, you're bringing in cocoa, you're bringing in sugar, you're bringing in dairy, and all of those products, the entire footprint from creating that product is accounted for by that company. So they're responsible for everything that's happening in their entire supply chain, is the way the global rules talk about it. So because they're sourcing from any given farmer or region, they're then socially and environmentally responsible for that. So that is why there's a lot of pressure coming down. Often scope 3 is the largest emitting region for most companies, surprisingly. I always imagined it would be scope 2, honestly, because of, carbon emissions and, from burning natural gas and other fuels. But surprisingly, when you lump together an entire supply chain going into a factory, scope 3 is incredibly large. So there's a lot going on there. I'll pause here for a second if anyone wants to ask questions about why these regulations are coming down. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay. So in order to solve these scope 3 emissions, different mechanisms have been created to make what is intangible tangible. So think of it, I personally think of it like investing in a market or, it's your own part of a company or a share in something, but to me, that's very intangible. So in order to create this product that is ensuring that emission has been reduced and ensuring that not even emissions have been reduced, but that something has been done that is true, measured, verified by a third party, not just what someone's saying. It's not greenwashing, and that it is a tangible product that can be bought, sold, and stored as an asset. Carbon credits were created. So carbon credits represent a single metric ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent. And so you can see the CO2 is sometimes the label, or CO2e. So the E and the ton of CO2e is for the equivalent, and that's accounting for gases like methane or nitrous oxide. These carbon credits were created few decades ago. They've been around a while. They were a great way to start the conversation and for companies to learn how to account for environmental factors, put value to it, but they're becoming outdated. So carbon credits are great because they take funds from companies that need to reduce their emissions. They put them to projects. Those projects then create the carbon credit, and then the carbon credit goes back to the company that invested, essentially. So oftentimes these are, developed by technology companies are big in carbon credit space. There's also a lot of oil and gas funded projects, just so they can offset the emissions that they have no other way to offset. So they can show emission reductions, even though they're kind of stuck. There's not another way since they're selling a natural gas or fuel product. So from there, carbon credits have been always offsets. Since then, they have become possibly insets. So the insets are when the carbon credit is funded and created by a CPG or a customer brand company in their own supply chain, or it is created by an outside firm that is then selling them to the correct supply chain managers or companies. So this keeps it all within the supply shed, but is still a carbon credit. But then we get to this bottom topic here, which is the scope 3 carbon credit, which is a new concept because instead of it just being a single packaged element that is sold from one person to another, it is now a metric ton of carbon reduced throughout a value chain. So it is accounted for by the dairy farm, by the processor, rather than us all counting that same emission, it is now cohesively throughout that supply chain, 1 metric ton reduced. So as you can imagine, that gets really complicated as there's a lot of spot sales on dairy. There's a lot of movement of products. It takes a lot of transparency and sharing of data between companies and, the people you buy your products from, which is usually a little more confidential. So we're getting into a realm where there's a lot more trust involved in this in order to make an impact. So that's where we're getting into the scope 3. And so I'll take a moment to explain that creating a carbon credit is not as simple as just either having a digester or feeding a feed additive. There is this incredible background of stuff going on to ensure that it is monitored, reported, verified. It is publicly transparent. It meets all global standards. It's, there's a lot of regulation behind it so that when it's audited, it is real and tangible and isn't going to get anyone in trouble. So typically with creating a carbon credit, you design a project and then you take that concept and you find a methodology that is scientifically proven and accepted globally. And then you apply that methodology to the project region. So bring it to different dairy farms if they want to participate. Typically then is when the farm will sign a contract saying they're willing to participate and give up rights to the carbon claim. And then you have to go through local stakeholder consultations. You have to go through national level approval, international level approval with ISO. And then starts the whole, looking at actual farm data and seeing if the reduction actually occurred. It goes on. It's a long process. I would, they're looking at ways to simplify this, but with the amount of worries over greenwashing, double counting, and a lot of other missteps that can occur within carbon, they're having a hard time finding where the shortcuts could be or the simplifications of the process.
How long generally, sorry, can I just jump in?
Yeah, that's encouraged.
That's what we're doing. All right. The process here is it's quite robust. is there just an average time frame for like project design to when you would get a carbon credit?
Roughly 2 years, if not a little more. So within Barry Callebaut, the Aglan carbon credit project with Vera, which is a global regulatory organization, started in 2019. And we're just creating a carbon credit. We're not creating a carbon credit. We're creating a verified emission reduction unit this month. So that has been quite some time. There's a lot of processes, a lot of back and forth, a lot of redesign, information collection and aggregation. So yeah, it's timely as well. So to move fast and create the reductions we need globally, to avoid increased heating and emissions, that's why we really need a shortcut version here.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does, in a very depressing way, but it's kind of expected, I would say. Okay. Thank
There
you.
are other projects that possibly can move faster depending on if it's direct interference with your supply chain, which example would be Danone. They work directly with a lot of supply farmers they've direct contracts with farmers. They don't have to go through this sort of process, but to have direct supply is very difficult for many companies. So it does depend on your supply chain and your setup, but I would say that this process is almost average. The digitization of the monitoring reporting of data could accelerate this, but it's not everyone's ideal solution. Not every dairy farm is going to want everything on their farm to be digital database sent to, record carbon reductions. That's a lot of data sharing. That's a lot of sensors to keep up on. That's to each, it's not a perfect fit for everyone, but it could create a better shortcut, maybe skim a year off of that.
Okay.
Yep. So all set on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So then we get into this very important part of creating any emission reduction claim, a carbon credit, any of these different terms. It's really important that you have all the data monitored, reported, and verified. This diagram on the left sort of shows that. So farm data is very important to the farmer, and it's understandable that not a lot is going to be shared. I remember even getting annoyed growing up filling out our organic surveys. Like, why do they need to know this? But being in the corporate space now and looking at it, it's incredibly different point of view. And it was a big learning curve for me to know why the data is needed and what it's used for. So speaking from my experience, the data is mostly just needed to ensure that, as I described with like the scope 3 sharing, nothing is double counted. It's all shared and reported so everyone can enjoy that benefit. And then it's real and measurable. So when audits come around, no one's getting sued. So the data is super important. It is valuable, but a lot of the data needed for these carbon projects are, I would describe, being less of a confidential data point. No one's asking, to my knowledge so far, with any of the feed additives for a full nutritionist diet and setup. They might need annual average numbers of what dry matter was your herd given, which is a general range that's used by most of the industry on average. There's a lot of the data is more generalized, I'd say. So there's a lot of things that would originally feel a little weird about sharing, but it's really important. And it's really good to share those things to get these real measurable reductions. And it's really important to share this data in that it helps dairy's been really good about reducing their emissions. The problem is a lot of it hasn't stayed within the dairy value chain. So there will continue to be, not heckling, but asking for continued reductions because it's not shown since it's being sold outside the chain. So it's important to keep those within the value chain to show the work and effort dairy is doing. And so by sharing the data, it can stay within the value chain and it'll prove how much dairy is really doing to reduce emissions and how much further progressive dairy is than most agriculture sectors or other sectors globally at making emission reductions. So farmers can benefit from carbon. It's new, it's scary, it's confusing, it takes time. It's a lot of learn as you go, which is something I would say dairy farmers are very good at. You know, they're a lot of times the first to try things and give it a test run and, you know, run with things and learn with it as they go. But there's a opportunity for a good amount of money for things you might already be doing in carbon. There's a good opportunity for possible other products on your farm, but it's also a good way to build a more collaborative supply chain where you can maybe get a closer relationship with where your milk product is going to get payments for those projects you're doing, where you're feeding a feed additive, you have a digester direct from the CPG. And it's a great way to just meet the industry goals that were set. So a lot of, you know, the DMI, we have a national dairy goal to be neutral by 2050. In order to meet that goal, we have to start keeping it in the supply chain and claiming it. And the benefit to the farm is that that's more progressive than most dairy globally. The US has always been a big supply base for companies globally. I know our Asia Pacific region buys from the US, Europe does. I mean, it's the US ships everywhere. So to be ahead of the curve, have a low emission product only strengthens the US dairy product in general. And overall, I want to highlight the increased farm resilience. So a lot of sustainability projects are going to be a hard transition. I'm not going to lie about that. So none of them are an easy change or an easy fix, but a lot of them, when worked closely with a resource or someone who's willing to help pay for everything and help you through the risk and all those other aspects that are technical in making the change to some of your practices on your farm, the resilience of your farm. I mean, you might have heard Austin Allred talk a few times. He's a dairy farmer in Washington State. Just like the amount of resilience his farm has increased to different weather patterns and changes. You know, it's going to be different for every farm, but to find that trusted partnership with your supply chain and start to, you know, work together on all this, it's really important. And it's a good opportunity for the farm to reduce risk and get a little bit of extra payment. And that is all my slides. But from here, I'm more than happy to just talk to you guys, or if you have specific topics you want to go over. If not, I can start to just talk about other things. So
yeah, this is a great time. If you have any questions, to unmute yourself and ask them. And then also remember, if you're in a space you can't unmute, the chat is also an option. I did have a question come through personally to me, and this individual said there is a lot here and it's changing quickly. Jennifer, how would you recommend an individual dairy farmer keep up? Are there any newsletters or sources you would point us to? Anything like that?
It is something I've been pushing to advocate for. I do think there should be more centralized information going out. I don't know of a good newsletter currently, but I do know that there are a lot of topics and conversations going on at the co-op level. So if you're a part of a co-op, they are getting a lot of resources on to have presentations from nutrient or trying to think of other examples. There are people going around giving updated presentations on all these topics. Otherwise, my advice would be to find someone you trust and, do it the way dairy farmers always have. You have your trusted advisors, you have your trusted relationships, and, just work with people you trust. And that might be the best case to go. It is a very demanding topic. And as you said, it's a lot of change. So don't stress yourself out about it, but it is something to keep on mind. And yeah, just find someone you trust to guide you through it.
I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. So if you were a farmer, an individual dairy farmer, let's set the scenario like you milk 2,000 cows. So you have enough size that you need to be paying attention to this, and you have an opportunity to really be a part of this solution. Like your heart is in the right place. You want to take part. But you're not there yet because it's you don't have your co-op isn't really monetizing yet, and you can't really, like the company that you work for, Jennifer, there's an opportunity, like you can get a farm started with a real example. But if you're not one of those farms, what would be your recommendation on like the first thing that you could do? Like where should a producer at least start on farm? I know this is theoretical, but like go with it. Like what would be one thing to get them started so that they can, because I think farmers, we really learn by like trying it out. That happens with everything. It happens with crop insurance. It happens with LGM. It happens with new feed additives. We learn by trying it out. So what would be your recommendation? Where should we try it out?
For sure. So a general answer to your question would be there are 5 main emission areas on farm that most companies account for. One is the enteric emissions that feed additives would handle, or a more refined diet. The second is manure methane. The third is from crop production. The fourth is energy use. So that would be looking at renewables. Why am I drawing a blank on the fifth? It'll come to me. I'm sorry, guys. But in general, I would say there's a lot of untapped resources within your state cooperative extension or state NRCS programs. So when I was looking at a lot of options for farmers with renewables, there's a lot of funding out there to just stick renewables on farm roofs and stuff. I mean, it's something you want to look into, see if it's going to fit for your region and the way you manage your farm. But there is a lot of funding out there to do renewables or energy audits on farm. And once you get an energy audit, there's a lot of resources out there. So that's a very easy first step. That's essentially low risk to the farm to look into. After that, I would say that your cooperative extension is a really good resource for this, and other local programs like the Dairy Center of Excellence. And I know there's one in Pennsylvania, New York. I know it's around. But it's a matter of finding those resources. They are in niche areas, they're hard to find. So it is looking into those things. But that is also where I do advocate for connecting through your co-op to where your milk goes, because there is tons of programs out there. There's lots of money being thrown at this. You have a lot of opportunities to pilot. It's just a matter of getting the connection to the end user and company. So Nestle, Unilever, Ben & Jerry's, all of these companies have so many projects out there. You just have to maybe work with your co-op to get them to reach out to where the dairy is going, get that back to you. They don't maybe need to claim or account for it immediately, but to just have that connection or advocate that this is important. because that is an area to get good funds and be a part of this. And yeah, once you have that direct connection, you know, there's projects for soil carbon sequestration, cover crops, there's funding for different feed additives. I think there's only one legally used in the US right now, but there's pilots going on. There's a lot of different manure management technologies coming around, biofiltro, N2 applied, lots of different options, or just solid liquid separation. That cuts emissions by 19% on the manure side. So there's a lot of things out there that farmers can be doing. It's a very disorganized way to get the information right now. Yeah. I hope that answers your question well enough, Laura. Very theoretical.
Awesome. Yeah, there's another question that just popped up in the chat. Is there any true regulation coming down to the farmer level yet, and who is leading that?
I have heard whisperings of regulations. The US, I have a very hard time believing they're gonna occur anytime soon or at all. The way we function and the way it is as an industry. So I know there's a lot of work going on to kind of protect against the regulation side of things, and more so have it be voluntary. And that's the other important part of moving quickly, is the more quickly we move and have this in control on our own, the less need for regulation there is. So that's, you know, a good part to think about too. But, you know, there are whisperings of regulations, but they're far out. I wouldn't worry about them. But it is something to keep in mind, that we see it happening other places like the Netherlands, New Zealand, and they're struggling with even the regulations they're trying to implement, trying to figure out what is real and tangible as a reduction. Do they have enough technology to even regulate this yet? You know, there's a lot of steps going on, and we're playing a part in that too. And I talk to those dairy farmers often, and it's a real struggle. So it's something to definitely work on avoiding by creating your own systems, doing it voluntarily, and getting ahead of the government regulations so they don't have to have a regulation.
So I have a question,
Yeah.
which is a little more global, not so much about the specifics. Do we have a way of a recognized method for measuring whether or not we've actually reduced carbon globally or nationally? Do we have any way of knowing if the United States is reducing our carbon footprint? Is there somebody measuring it now to say, okay, ever since we've been doing, really focusing on this, we have actually reduced it by this much? Does that exist, and is it a recognized method?
Yeah, so the IPCC, ISO, a lot of global areas like that. ISO is international standards, so you think any standard unit of measurement, they work on this as well. So there are global ways to measure this. There is always going to be, what percent accuracy do we have? What significant figure can we go to? Which is the same for anything, even a scale you use at your doctor's office. But I would say that it is measured to a reasonable level. And there are a lot of companies coming out now that are measuring even with satellites, which is very interesting. Right now, those satellites mostly just measure carbon dioxide. We're not so much advanced enough for methane or nitrous oxide just yet. Those gases are a bit harder to measure. But there's companies like Carbon Space, they measure using satellites. It's very impressive. Honestly, a lot of these technologies are a bit above my head, but I know we also do, we have the historic records that we can kind of capture with new ice layers with the ice coring. That's a great way to measure carbon change, but we're not really storing any more ice lately, so that gets a little rough, but it is a really good question, and it is something we can measure and tangibly get a grasp on. It's coming down to the point where we try to allocate. It's not about measuring the total emissions, it's more about allocating. So if we're all trying to say, this is what I'm responsible for, a lot of times what I'm responsible for is overlapping with what 3 other people are responsible for. So it's a matter of, sharing where we need to share and being responsible individually where we need to be responsible individually, if that makes sense. So that's what a lot of the confusion over measurement and allocation and reporting comes from, which is why the greenhouse gas protocol is updated regularly and changing. They just released the flag protocol, FLAG, for land and agriculture use reporting recently, and companies are still adjusting to that. There's more updates coming out on that. So, it's a constantly changing space, but it's mostly in the reporting side of things. But that's a very good question.
I have another question. You mentioned that Ben and Jerry's, Unilever, Nestle, some companies that seem very active, kind of progressive in this space. Are there just another handful of brands, companies that are kind of like leading the charge from a CPG standpoint?
I mean, I can only speak from maybe the ones I've heard speak at conferences, things like that.
Yeah.
I know General Mills has a lot going on. Danone has just released a very ambitious reductions for methane in dairy specifically.
Yeah.
So it's often a part of publicly available. They release their goals and report
Yeah.
on those goals. But I would say most companies do have goals around this and do have programs around it. So yeah. Essentially most companies, I would say, you're pretty set to know that they have something going on, and maybe not leading the charge all the time, but they are often leading the charge in different areas. So not everyone is focused on feed additives. Not everyone is focused on manure. A lot of the companies might be more specialized in one area than the other to start working with farms on different things. A lot of farm companies I know are really good at, doing soil carbon sequestration, doing soil work and cover crops, things like that. So it just depends. Sorry, I was just reading in the chat. It's a very good thing to be a know about. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. I'm going to reopen the floor for more questions for Jennifer. This is a really great space to have access to kind of an expert and a safe space to ask any questions you have. So I definitely want to welcome that.
And I also want to make it clear that if you guys have any questions, my email will be shared after this call. I'm happy to be a resource or direct to resources if I know any.
Speaking of resources, Jennifer, thank you so much for the talk. It was awesome. Great to learn about that. If we want additional training or resources, maybe from a technical standpoint on different scopes and different things that are happening, do you know of any of those that we could look into or have access to those?
So that is a tough one right now. I'm working on developing a few. So hopefully soon I'll be able to release a few. I know the Environmental Defense Fund is developing these trainings as well.
Mm-hmm.
And global carbon accounting companies, like auditing companies,
Mm-hmm.
Aster Global, SES, they have experts that have created these materials and gone to classrooms at like UC Berkeley, places like this,
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the same thing to students. And I'm sure there's resources out there. I really wish I had a better answer to that. I also do know that Nutrient, that W or NEW, yeah,
Mhm.
like the Nutrient company. They also have a few trainings that they've given at the co-op level that I'm sure are, farmer resource slides that might be on their website now. So I
Awesome.
would
If you,
check there.
yeah, if you need a guinea pig for your class, let me know.
Yeah, of course. If I could ask you a question in return there.
Absolutely.
What are the best types of resources that would be good to look for? Are we looking for sort of like a fact sheet level, a video, a course that you can sign up for? What do you think is most useful?
I think it totally depends on your audience. Like I have training in this area, but not necessarily in like what you do. So for me, I'm looking for like a grad level course, but I think for like farmers, as it's being applied to them, I mean, I've seen handouts be really helpful. Maybe like webinars like this, I feel like is probably more helpful to a larger audience. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's fine. If anyone else has feedback on that, please feel free to send it to me. Always looking for what, is most helpful to a dairy farmer.
There is another question in the chat, Jennifer. I'm wondering if you can talk about the feed additives and if you happen to know specifically Agalin.
Yes.
Does it actually work to reduce methane? What are the impacts to the cow?
Yeah. So feed additives is probably what I've researched the most in the last year. Specifically, the project I've been working on is with Agalin. So very familiar with that product. There's a bunch of other ones out there coming close down the pipeline. I'd say that Agalin currently is the only approved one for use in the US. It has anywhere from an 8% to a 14% reduction in enteric methane, according to meta-analysis and a bunch of literature. But a lot of times the claim will only be close to 8% because of when you have a large project, there's a lot of error to account for. So just remember, when you feed a feed additive, you're not always getting the highest number that is reported in literature. Specifically, Agalin does, in the literature, reduce methane and over our long-term studies. And the significance of it being approved at a global level in the carbon projects, the way the Barry Callebaut methane reduction Agalin project has, is that they've approved this, that it at least lasts for 7 years. So, and then they'll look at renewing it again for up to 21 years. So because it's gone through all that ridicule, we saw that, I think Jeff had asked about, there's like 2 years of, developing a project, getting through that. That is a lot of checking the data, looking at the science, asking for more studies, filling in all those gaps. So yes, it works. Is it the perfect product for every farm? I won't say that. Every farm is different. Every diet is different. Everyone has different genetics. I mean, I personally am an advocate of the product, I'd say, but there's other ones coming out. So keep an eye on it. There's more stuff coming up. I'd say the closest are probably going to be Bovaer, the 3-NOP, 3-NOP. And then after that, maybe Mutrol coming to the US. Those are currently approved in the EU. They claim higher reductions. There's a little less research on it done in the US right now, but a lot of our large universities are working on it. Like Cornell and UC Davis are both doing studies on those products now. So in order to be approved, the impacts on the cow have to be deeply studied. Agalin, the impacts of the cow are, if anything, positive. It was developed as a feed flavoring. So it just got them to, it's all essential oils, just increase the feed intake for cows. Smells beautiful, but it's different for each product. So definitely work with a trusted nutritionist, work with maybe a local sales rep to talk to them about it. Get opinions, I'd say. Different solutions for everybody, but feed additives are an easier way to reduce your emissions, and a large portion of them with relatively low change to your actual operation, because a lot of times they're added to the mineral mix at the mill, just delivered to your farm, no physical changes in your operation. So that's one beauty of that as an option to look at. But
Awesome,
to
great.
I would
ahead.
just say, sorry if there's silence. So just, definitely ask if you're asked to feed a feed additive or join a project, ask about the research, just ask how thorough it's been. If there's any studies that are contradictory, and what might cause that, just do your homework, chat while you're milking cows and get the information.
Yeah, really good. I think Marianne had a follow-up question in there, Jennifer. Just curious, is 8% a net reduction after the carbon cost of producing the agalin?
8% a net reduction after the carbon cost of yes. So that includes the production of the product, the shipping. You look at transit around the US, shipping from where it's produced in Europe. It's accounting for all the emissions involved in the project. So that's a lot of where the calculations in the 2-year development also comes in, as you look at all of these aspects. So the emissions are all included in there and regularly calculated, if not annually, or twice a year.
Awesome. And I think another question came in that I think ties in really well to your last statement about looking at the research and all that, but what should a farmer look for when approached with a carbon project?
There's going to be a lot of variations. So, and it's honestly, I'm going to say my opinion. So take that as you will. I think it's very important to keep the emissions within the value chain. So if you're approached with a carbon project, just make sure that it's going to stay within the value chain with your milk product and go to one of the companies or brands that uses your product. My reason for saying this is, number one, so that companies don't continuously say you're not making a change, you're not reducing emissions because they're being sold outside the value chain. Instead, they're staying with you. You can claim them and say, hey, I'm making progress. The second thing I would look for is possibly to not just staying in the scope, but the other important reason for that is the price will be better. So right now, the pressure on getting scope 3 emissions reduced is so much higher than the pressure on oil and gas companies to reduce their emissions. So you're going to get probably a better value at this point in the market. I can't speak for how it's going to look in the future, but you'll most likely get a better price for it being not an offset carbon credit, but an inset project. Inset is probably the key word that'll be used. Look for that. But you might be approached with carbon claim, verified emission reduction. But if you hear the word carbon credit, look for inset being tied to it. That's just my view. Offsets are definitely a good resource for other people, and they will bring money into the farm. They are another option. It's just personal opinion for the longer term impacts and how it will benefit you in the future. And I would also say, when you're approached, just trust who you're working with. You're going to be talking to them. They're going to be collecting your data. Just know who you're working with, trust them, take your time to get to know them before signing up. I would also warn you to maybe read the fine print of if you had to drop out of the project for any reason, going out of business, just a new project comes along, just understand the terms. Are you going to have to pay back all of the money that you were given for participating so far? That's happened with previous carbon projects. So just, be aware. Things like manure management, often they'll regulate your feed as well. So a lot of the digester companies will say you can't change a lot of your diet. Just, read the contract, have conversations with the company, get it in writing. A lot of the stuff you would worry about in the corporate world, that's annoying, but it's a good thing to look at. And I guess that would be my best advice for what to look for as a farm. Look to share the risk and make sure that they value you and your work, because the dairy farmer is doing all of the work on this. You should get the most value and the reduced risk. So make sure you're being respected in the contract.
Yeah, thank you. We do have Jennifer for 4 more minutes, so this is my last call for any questions that you would like to voice or put in the chat. I'll just give it a couple seconds.
Hey, this might be too big of a question for 3 minutes, but in your opinion, someone who's like very embedded in it, someone who has a big stake in the industry, like where do the gaps exist right now? Like where are the places in this process where there's not someone meeting needs?
So one gap that's already been identified on this meeting, resources, trainings, understanding to the
Sure.
farmer, the co-op, the supply chain. That's a big one. There needs to be more cohesive communication. So everyone's on the same page and understanding, and there's a system in place to go to for those resources. The other gaps I might mention would be there are gaps in how to track within the supply chain. Dairy is a perishable product. So if you're going, a lot of times, co-ops will have to buy a spot sale, sell some out of their, depending on how much production they can handle. Dairy moves. It's very efficient. We don't waste much. It's great, but then it's hard to track. And that's where it's a gap. We don't understand how to handle that yet and really trace all of this or account for it in maybe a supply shed region where we can track it better. That's another large gap. So understanding our supply chains better, having the resources for all of this is important. And then, yeah, otherwise it's just a lot of rolling with the punches. There's going to be changes. We all just went through COVID. There's changing rules constantly. It's terrible, it's frustrating, it's stressful, but it's using the best science we have now to make decisions and then moving forward with what we have.
Totally fair. I really appreciate that. Thanks for that answer. That was great.
Yeah, no, that was a really good question. So thank you for that, Kate.
All right. And with that, we are coming up to just about time. So I definitely want to say thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your knowledge, sharing your insights, sharing your opinions on this ever-changing topic. I will be sure, like she said, to put her email in the recording email. So if anybody has any additional questions you couldn't ask today, feel free to reach out to her. Also want to say thank you to Zoetis for being our Enhance web host. And again, just a big thank you to everyone who shared some time with us today. And so I hope you have a great weekend and take care.
Thanks, everyone.